Kohler.
Something you just said then. Does the media protocol need updating?
In my view, I think it does. It's 19 years old. I don't think it takes account of where we are in terms of the impact of social media, and as we saw it play out in events following Southport. I think it's not just the media protocol that needs updating, and obviously the Law Commission are looking at contempt of court in terms of how do we wrestle with that misinformation, disinformation, balancing the need for a fair trial and making sure there's not contempt of court issues.
And is it being updated, or do you not know?
In terms of the media protocol, that is being worked through now. I think as a result of Southport, National Police Chiefs Council are now working with Crown Prosecution Service and working with government to look at how do we deal with situations like this moving forward.
I'd like to explore a more general question about how much the summer riots were a manifestation of a breakdown of trust between the police and the public, or certain sections of the public. Emily, you've written about or spoken about a crisis of trust in institutions in this context. Do you want to amplify on that a little?
This was part of an interview I did for The Observer last summer, and it was a comment made in relation to a number of institutions. I think the challenge that we had is that we were trying to, or colleagues were trying to explain the criminal justice process and the contempt of court and why certain information, every detail wasn't allowed to be released to the public for the reason of trying to protect the criminal justice process to ultimately get justice for the families. So I think the point I was trying to make was actually we're trying to explain a process to people, but us as institutions, and I think it's not just the police, I think it applies in other criminal justice situations, it applies to politicians, it applies to, councils, because I think people have seen a real, public services are struggling, and we've seen over the last 15 years or so that services are not delivering for the public in the way that they expect them to. And I think that, amongst with some of the high-profile scandals that we've had in policing, politics and others, I think has undermined that trust and confidence in those sectors. And so I think when you're trying to go out and explain to the public how decisions are being made, why certain decisions are being taken, why certain information isn't being put in the public domain to protect that process, I think we were coming at it from a point where they didn't trust what we were saying. And so I think my point was we need to try and look at how we rebuild that trust in all of those different sectors, so people know that they're going to get the right service when they want it, and then when we do have to explain to them or make difficult decisions, they understand why that's happening.
And the data backs you up, and particularly deprived communities having less trust in the police. Is that just a factor of deprivation, or is there more to that? Is it the way police deal with those from deprived communities?
The honest answer is I wouldn't know in detail. I think, we know that in lots of deprived communities you're more likely to be a victim of crime. And so obviously then if you haven't then had the right response from the police, which unfortunately we know things don't always go the way they should do, that might be, a reason why you then don't have the trust and confidence to call again or to go back to the police when you need them another time. But I think that's true in lots of communities. So it's probably something that we need to do a bit more research to really understand that.
Do any of your colleagues want to have a comment on that?
I'm happy to build on the point on trust. I think the point made that this is an erosion of trust in all public bodies is relevant. I think we see at times malign actors and social media working in a coordinated way to undermine trust and to sow polarisation and discontent. And we see that some of this is based from abroad. We see that some of this is based from sort of individuals. And the thing that we're dealing with today that is sort of different to 10 or even certainly 20 years ago is the pace at which sort of misinformation and disinformation can spread. One of the characteristics that we dealt with in 2011 when we were sort of looking at our response to disorder in London then was how we were behind the curve in terms of some of the disorder was spreading via a very early form of BlackBerry Messenger, whereas now the threats are spreading at a exponentially greater rate, and the disinformation and misinformation is spreading at an exponentially greater rate, which is undermining trust and confidence because people find it difficult to distill what is actually true.
And Chair, if I could add, I think the disinformation element, which has been described by colleagues here, we saw that across the country. That does undermine trust and confidence. But one of the key things around public order policing, as well as especially trained officers, the community officers, one of the important elements is what we call a bronze engagement role, a specific senior officer whose job is to engage with local communities, independent advisory groups, local stakeholders to try and build that trust and confidence. So we trade on relied, trusted engagement and relationships in peacetime, so to speak, so that when we are in a position, as we saw, across the country last summer, that local officers are able to speak to people and say, no, these are the facts of the matter, you trust us, and that's an important part. So when we think about specialist public order tactics and the training we give our commanders in particular, we are very, very strong that the most important public order tactic is actually community engagement and communication with local communities, so they are both feel assured, are assured, and of course then can give us important information to deal with the issues of crime and criminality that take place.
And that underlines the importance of community policing, does it not?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of our public order model, and I've had the privilege to go to France and see what they do, where they have a dedicated riot squad, and the gendarmerie and the CRS, is all of the officers that we train, whether they're dedicated to public order duties, they're always policing London or Essex or Merseyside, they're drawn from local community policing. Now, of course, that has an abstraction, because when they're not doing that, when they're doing this kind of stuff, they're not policing neighbourhoods. But what it does mean is that when they're in a neighbourhood, they understand that community. They are not there just to make a mess and run away. They're actually there thinking, do you know what, I'm a police officer, Pelian principles. This is about prevention, engagement and discussion. And of course that leads to some of the discussions that you'll have seen about whether officers are in full code, protective equipment, or whether in normal duty. And there is a fine balance for commanders and officers to say, if we can talk our way and engage is a much better, and you see that very often. And to put that in context, there are 800 notified events, either through social media, notified to us, or we came across over that 2-week period. Only 250 took place, and only we would say about 30 of those, important 30, came into a place of disorder. And a lot of that was because of preemptive, proactive engagement with local communities. And as Mr. Twister said, a huge protest that had all the potential to be disorderly because of good engagement and good policing. The same in Southport, and you saw that in many places across the country as well.
Tony, I think you've got a question.